This is HOA property now. That's what she said right in my face as her manicured finger jabbed the air toward the aluminum sign bolted into my grandfather's wooden dock post. The letters gleamed like a threat in the afternoon sun. Members only. HOA property. 3 weeks earlier, I'd ignored their letter about lakefront compliance. Now they'd decided to stake their claim literally. What Vivian Carr didn't know was that buried in my basement was something that could destroy her entire argument and her career. My name's Ethan Grayson. I'm 36, a historic preservation specialist, the kind of guy who spends weeks restoring century-old buildings brick by brick. I'm good with records, maps, deeds, anything that tells you where things really belong. I'd been away for 2 weeks working on a restoration downtown when I came home to the lake house my grandfather left me. Walter built it himself back in '79, one-story, faded green siding, the kind of wood that turns silver from decades of lake breeze. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. The place hadn't changed much since the funeral 6 months ago. I still couldn't bring myself to move his fishing gear. The dock, stretched 60 feet out into Clear Lake, weathered solid part of my childhood. But that day, I froze halfway down the path. The sign wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a declaration of war. I wanted to tear it off right there, but anger wasn't going to help. Proof would. So I walked over to my neighbor, Howard Brennan. 70 retired, been here since before the HOA even existed. When he saw me, his shoulders slumped like he'd been expecting this conversation. He sighed and said, "Vivian pushed it through at the last board meeting. Said it's time to formalize lake access members only." I repeated those words. Members only, my grandfather's dock had been standing for 45 years. Howard just shrugged. "She says it's about liability and upkeep. Insurance, you know." "Right. Insurance." I told him they couldn't just put a sign on private property. His face tightened. "That's the thing, Ethan," he said quietly. "She's saying it isn't your property. She found some old maps, says the waterfront belongs to the community. The HOA was formed in 2000. Her records claim it's part of the covenant." That cold, sinking feeling hit my chest. Not anger yet, just awareness. This wasn't going to be fixed with a screwdriver. Howard looked at me, pity in his eyes. "My advice? Don't fight her. She's got a lawyer on retainer. You'll lose more than you'll win." I thanked him, walked back home and sat in my grandfather's old office. His desk was still cluttered, a mug with coffee residue, old woodworking magazines, and a small wooden box with a brass clasp. Inside was an envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. "If you're reading this, Ethan, it means they've tried again. Don't let them rewrite history. Find the truth." The letter mentioned a key and something hidden behind the old wine rack in the basement. That's when I realized he'd been preparing for this fight long before he died. I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The basement smelled of concrete and damp wood. I found the rack heavy oak built to last, and sure enough there was a latch underneath. When I pressed it, the entire thing swung forward like a secret door from a detective novel. Behind it was another door painted blue with a brass keyhole. The key fit perfectly. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 feet square, but packed with history. Maps, files, a desk, and on the wall one massive hand-drawn survey labeled Lake Survey 1947, Surveyor Logan Pierce. The lake was outlined in blue ink. My grandfather's property was shaded red, marked 15 acres, including 412 meters of waterfront. The neighborhood didn't even exist back then. This wasn't nostalgia, it was proof. I opened the filing cabinet. Inside were the original deed tax record survey reports and letters dating back to the 1940s. Every document said the same thing: the land including the dock belonged to the Grayson family. No shared access, no community covenant. My pulse was racing. For the first time I realized how deep this ran. Then came the gut punch. One letter from 2014, HOA letterhead. Vivian's signature. It requested permission to survey waterfront areas for boundary clarification. On the bottom, in Walter's handwriting, a single word: no. They'd been trying for years. They'd waited until he died, figuring I wouldn't know better. They picked the wrong grandson. The next morning, I called a surveyor Precision Land Survey Company. The man who answered introduced himself as Landon Pierce. I told him about the 1947 survey signed by someone named Logan Pierce. He laughed softly. "That was my grandfather," he said. "I know that lake." 2 days later, Landon arrived with a truck full of GPS equipment. We spent hours trekking through brush searching for the original boundary markers. By noon, we found one, a concrete post half buried with the numbers CL470089 etched into the top. He took GPS readings, compared them to the 1947 coordinates. A perfect match. 2 more markers confirmed the same line. By the end of the day, Landon looked up from his tablet. "Ethan, the HOA's line is 3 meters too far inland. They've been encroaching on your property the entire length of the shore. 3 meters. That was all it took for them to steal my grandfather's dock and the entire community shoreline." I hired an attorney, Claudia Rhee. Sharp, methodical, no nonsense. She looked over the documents, nodded, and said, "You've got a bulletproof case." That afternoon, she sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA demanding they remove the sign and halt construction on the community dock. 7 days to comply. The next morning, my phone rang. Caller ID Vivian Carr. Her voice was perfectly calm, the kind of calm that hides teeth. "Ethan, we got your lawyer's letter." "That really wasn't necessary. We're neighbors after all." "Then you should have knocked before claiming my property," I said. She hesitated, then snapped, "The HOA has records." I laughed. "Records aren't the same as a deed, Vivian." Her tone dropped to a low, icy threat. "We'll see about that." And she hung up. Over the next week, the neighborhood buzzed. Some people called me selfish, accused me of ruining the community spirit. Others whispered that Vivian had gone too far. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should have just let it go. It was only a dock, right? But then I opened Walter's journal again and reread his last entry. "They'll wait until you stop caring. Don't let them." That was all I needed. I wasn't just protecting a dock, I was protecting proof. We filed for an injunction. The judge granted a temporary restraining order halting all HOA construction. When I handed Vivian the court order at her doorstep, she sneered. "This is ridiculous," she said. "No," I told her, "it's legal." Word spread fast. By the time the hearing came, half the neighborhood showed up. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive. I could feel Vivian's glare from across the aisle, navy suit, pearl earrings, posture like royalty about to be dethroned. Judge Wells. Silver hair. Steady voice called the session to order. Claudia presented first, clear, precise, every word landing like a hammer. She laid out the 1947 deed, the survey photos of the boundary markers, GPS overlays. "The HOA has acted on assumption," she said. "My client acts on law." Then, the HOA's attorney stood, Richard Vaughn, smooth voice, expensive tie. He didn't deny my ownership. Instead, he argued adverse possession, that the HOA had maintained and used the land openly for 24 years, long enough to make it theirs. He called it community stewardship. Claudia stood almost smiling. "Your Honor," she said, "adverse possession requires uncontested use. Here are 3 letters from Mr. Grayson's grandfather dated 2005, 2012, and 2014 explicitly rejecting HOA access." She handed them to the judge. They weren't uncontested. They were ignored. The judge looked up over her glasses. "Mr. Vaughn, do you have any evidence of permission from the Grayson family?" He hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but there was no enforcement." "Silence isn't consent," Claudia interrupted. That was it. The room went dead quiet. After 5 long minutes of review, the judge delivered her ruling. The court recognizes parcel CL470089 as privately owned by Mr. Ethan Grayson. The HOA's claim constitutes trespass. All signage and structures within the boundary must be removed within 14 days. Vivian's face drained of color. She didn't say a word as she walked out. A week later, the county fined the HOA $15,000 for unpermitted construction and misrepresentation of property boundaries. Vivian resigned the same night. The new board sent me an apology letter and a proposal. They wanted to lease part of my waterfront for the community dock legally this time with clear terms and acknowledgement of ownership. I said yes, but under my conditions, 5-year lease liability insurance in my name and a clause that said, "Access is granted by permission, not by right." They agreed. When Marcus and Linda, the new board members, came to remove the members-only sign, they did it quietly, respectfully. Marcus unscrewed the bolts himself, carried the metal plaque to his truck, and drove off. The old wooden post stood bare again, just 4 holes where arrogance used to hang. I walked down that dock, later the evening light golden on the water, and for the first time in months, the place felt right again. Vivian moved out a few months later. No farewell email, no goodbye. Just gone. Some said she couldn't stand the embarrassment. Others said she wanted a fresh start. Either way, Clear Lake felt lighter. Sometimes I sit on that dock at sunrise and think about how close I came to giving up, how easy it would have been to stay quiet, pay the membership fee, and let the truth fade with the old wood. But boundaries matter. Not just lines on a map, they define respect ownership history. My grandfather understood that. So do I. People like Vivian think power comes from control, from rewriting the rules. But real power comes from proof, from knowing exactly where you stand even when everyone around you says you're wrong. And in the end, that's all that saved me. Precision builds justice, and justice, when done right, builds community.